Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery for another session of Monk Chat, our weekly opportunity to discuss the Dhamma with no topic restrictions. So the limit to the topic is only the limit of the questions that we receive. So as long as questions continue to come in, we will continue to answer them in line with the Buddha's Dhamma. And when the flow of questions dries up, then the flow of answers will also dry up and the program will come to an end. And currently there are no questions, which means this may be the shortest monk chat on record.
All right.
Hello to Rick, Gita, Manny, Karen, Jayanta, and Jerry. Welcome to all of you. So this is your opportunity to type in questions. Anything even vaguely related to Buddhism is acceptable, and you have 3 wonderful venerables to answer questions. So to my right, we have Aya Soma, and to my left, we have Bhante Jayasara, and I am Bhante Sudaso. So we're delighted to answer any questions you might have. Questions can also come from the monastery residents, by the way.
Pretty low for now. Maybe we have to wait a little bit for people to come in.
You have a question?
I was just thinking maybe if you could discuss all the different terms such as ajahn, tan, sale. I think that for some people, even myself, it's confusing. Like, what is this? Tara, Mahatara. So maybe what does that mean?
Yeah, so Anagarika Jens is asking about all the different titles that we have in the monastic world. And I recall when I went to a Abhayagiri in the library, there was a document that was about 6 pages long, and it was just a list of literally dozens and dozens of titles for monastics and the meaning of each one, and it's long.
Okay.
There's a lot, and I don't even think that list was complete. So what we have from the time of the Buddha is actually quite simple. So there's Bhante for male monks, Aya for female monks as a title. And for somebody's ordination status, there's bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, samanera, samaneri. It's very simple. And also from the time of the Buddha, there was the term avuso, which would be used when talking to someone who was your equal or junior. But that word has almost entirely passed out of usage except in ceremonial contexts.
Sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I actually know a couple of monks who use the word avuso from time to time, but it's not common. So these are what we have from the Pali tradition from the time of the Buddha. Since then, pretty much every Buddhist country has developed its own customs of using other titles. Some are from Pali. So for example, Thera and Mahatera, these are from Pali. So Thera commonly refers to someone who's been ordained for at least 10 years, fully ordained. So a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni for at least 10 years. Female version is Theri. And then someone who's been a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni for 20 years or more is called Mahatera or Mahateri. By the way, it should be pointed out that Thera, Teri, Mahatera, Mahateri can only be used for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. They cannot be used for any other kind of ordination. So sometimes you'll see these terms used incorrectly, but they can only be used for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And then you have a whole slew of other titles. So Ajahn, for example, is used in Thailand, and it's an adaptation of the Pali word acharya, which means teacher. In Burma, Sayadaw means great teacher. Sayalay means small teacher. And they use that to refer to the women who follow 10 precepts but are not technically ordained. So mildly diminutive title for women who are not fully ordained in Burma. And I mean, there's if I keep going, even in the Theravada world, there's dozens of different titles that are used. And you start adding in Mahayana, Vajrayana, then the list just grows and grows and grows and grows. So one of these days, I should see if somebody has a copy of that list that I'd seen. Is that enough on that? Do we really want to add something?
Well, the only thing in terms of Thai, the only thing that I know is that Tan and Kruba are basically the same level, like usually, but they're from different parts of Thailand, right? So if a monk is not a Tara or an Ajahn, which would be the same level essentially, then depending on what part of Thailand their tradition is from, it's either Kruba or Tan. I didn't know anything about the Burmese one, so that was new to me.
It gets even more complicated. So in Thailand, there's many different regional variations. So again, if we get going on all the different titles, that would be the entire monk chat is just going through all the different titles for monks and what they mean.
Yeah,
Monk
there's
title,
also
not
the
monk
Thai Vatican titles that are
Lord.
all other universes. So yeah, there's many names. The ones in Tibetan Buddhism are always very confusing to me. Probably that's because I don't really practice in that tradition. But I seem to understand that some titles are actually also names, so it's sometimes difficult to distinguish that to fully understand what is what.
Also, in some branches of Buddhism, a monk will be called not by their actual name, but by the name of their monastery. For example, Pa'ok Sayadaw, his name is not Pa'ok. His name is something else, I forget what. But he's the abbot of Pa'ok Monastery. So the previous abbot was also called Pa'ok Sayadaw, and the next one will also be called Pa'ok Sayadaw. So it's not a name, it's actually he's named after his monastery.
So you would be the West Orange Sayadaw Bante.
No, I would be Bante Empty Cloud, which is actually not too bad. I would take that. That's pretty good. And you would be Aya Empty Cloud.
I like that better than Aya West Orange.
You're going with the Sri Lankan way, like Bante Henapola Gunaratana, and Henapola is the village that he was from.
That's right. Yeah.
So I would be Bante Tom's River Jayasara.
That's actually quite nice. That's pretty good. I would get it. I would take it that. But
I would be Denver Sudaso, which is
well, I would be Aya Italy because I grew up all over the country, so I have no place of origin.
By the place of birth.
Well, I'm not going to disclose that live. That's how they steal passwords.
So, moving on. Jerry asks, what is the meaning of the one well gone? So that is one particular translation of the Pali word sugata. So sugata has two parts, technically three parts. So the prefix su, which means good or well or pleasant or happy or easy. The verb root, actually the verb root for this one is a little complicated, but briefly speaking, it means to go. And the past participle suffix ta, which makes it past participle, so gone. So translating it, the one well gone is very literal, but in my opinion, not particularly meaningful. One thing which is worth pointing out is that one of the words that's used for heaven or for a heavenly rebirth is sugati. So a good destination or a good fate or a good result. So a sugata then is somebody who has arrived at a good destination, who's living in a heavenly state already. So I actually like to translate sugata as sublime, which is one of the less common translations, but still you'll come across it from time to time. So that's what it means, is that the Buddha, or any Arhat for that matter, is someone who's arrived at a a pleasant state of being, a heavenly state of being.
Maybe we all become Sugato.
See?
I think
See.
Bhante G translates that as sublime. I like it as sublime.
Yeah.
I actually like the one well gone. Because we go so many places and it's so much dukkha, but going really well, somewhere good. Maybe we all do that.
They've gone to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And Manny asks, what is Dhammanupassana?
Well, actually, Bhante J just gave a whole series while we were traveling a few weeks ago on the
Satipatthana.
on the Satipatthana. So I think you can check those videos. And actually, Bhante Sudhaso doesn't know yet, but he will also give a series on the Satipatthana starting soon. So I think, we've spoken, and we will speak a lot about it.
That will be the fourth talk is Dhammanupassana.
Yeah.
That's it? That's your answer?
Oh, well, I thought Aya was
Yeah, I think you can.
pointing to the video, so we didn't
Yes.
spend a whole.
Okay. So Robert says, could you please explain Sampapalapa and perhaps offer some advice to help us know whether we're engaging in it? Who are you
Bhante
pointing?
J.
Oh.
Okay.
Sampapalapa.
Yeah. So my preceptor Bhante G would say Sampapalapa is what is it called? An onomatopoeia. It means how it sounds. Sampapalapa blah 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 blah. That's what he would do. So Sampapalapa is basically like useless speech or unworthy speech of the well, speech that is not conducive to the goal. Right? This is speech that you should be very, very mindful of engaging in. Right? Sometimes, because I can remember after I first learned about Sampapalapa and I was trying to be, I'm not very, even at work, I was never too social, but sometimes I would end up, even without trying, in these social groups of people just yapping at work. And the first thing I would try to do is find a skillful way to eject out of that and get out of it. And then if I couldn't, I would just be very mindful. I would just like basically bring my awareness to my body and my mind and just watch myself listening to what they were saying, listening to, what I wanted to respond to and all this kind of stuff. And so I would just focus on mindfulness as opposed to actually engaging until I saw an opening to get out of there. But so this is, sometimes if you're meeting somebody new, a little Sampapalapa can like make a connection, but after that it can be unskillful, especially because it turns into, did you hear, such and such, what such and such did to or with such and such, and it gets all into all these like interpersonal things and Jerry Springer kind of stuff, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that in many of the suttas, when someone would come to meet the Buddha, especially if the person was not already a Buddhist, then it begins with the Buddha and that person exchanging polite greetings, and it says, after the appropriate cordial talk was finished, and then it goes on to the Dhamma conversation. So exactly how long the appropriate cordial talk lasted and exactly what its nature was is not specified anywhere in the suttas. But it's notable that the Buddha actually would engage in a little bit of just like polite, friendly conversation with people when they would come to meet him. And it's also notable, for example, when a wandering monk would come to see the Buddha, the first thing the Buddha would do is he would say like, how are you doing? How's your health? Are you getting enough to eat? So he would start by asking like these very like down-to-earth friendly questions. And this is something that I find really adorable about the Buddha. So sometimes we think of the Buddha as this like stern, wise father figure who's always like, you foolish idiots, why are you doing these idiot things? But instead, you show up and he's just like, "Oh, hello, how are you doing? How's your health holding up? Are you getting enough to eat?" So it's this really, I find this really cute and personable. So, and actually, I do feel that, as Bhante J was saying, a little bit of cordial small talk can be a way of kind of establishing a friendly connection with someone before launching into a deeper or more meaningful conversation. Just make sure that you actually get to the meaningful conversation part. So it's like, hello, what's your name? Where are you from? How did you get interested in Buddhism? Like some basic things like that are a nice thing to start, but then actually start talking about something more profound. Okay. So Rick has a question. Rick says, I have a question about the saying, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I have witnessed how this phrase can cause harm. In American English, people ask, did that accident victim suffer? Meaning, did they experience extreme pain? I have heard practitioners shame others who are in unimaginable pain. I prefer pain is inevitable, but emotional reactivity is optional. The truth is all beings experience suffering and samsara, so suffering is not optional until one attains full awakening. Venerables, do you have any reflections? And Robert Martin, I think in reference to this question, says, is that even a Buddhist thing? It sounds like a fake Buddha quote, or in that neighborhood at least. So Ayasoma?
I would say that it's definitely a Buddhist thing to answer to Robert Martin. Actually, I first heard that quote from actually Bhante Gunaratana when I was at Bhavana Society. And actually quite liked it because it kind of gave me an immediate understanding of what was possible in the path. So essentially, yes, if you can scroll back, your suggestion, pain is inevitable, but emotional reactivity is optional. I mean, that's very partial reality, and it's true that one suffering is not optional until one attains full awakening, but it's actually also not true. It is still optional. But the complete eradication of suffering is obviously only available to us when one has full awakening. But if we start dumbing down, the what is possible, then we kind of get into that kind of idea that actually the complete elimination of suffering is not possible. And if you can not scroll, that would be great. So I can, please, sorry. So I can see since it's a multiple question. Thank you. So sorry for the little technical difficulty behind the scenes here.
It's more complicated when the question is in multiple parts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's true. So many different people, whether we're practicing the path or not practicing the path, will say all sorts of different things. They will also use different concepts like karma in an unskillful way. We've actually had that conversation during the panel on karma, on whether or not, I think our friend from Holland was actually essentially saying that perhaps it would be more skillful not to talk about karma altogether, not to share too much the truths of Dharma, the truth of Dharma on karma, because karma is used very so often by so many people and so many also groups of people, also institutionally, as we've seen in India for so many centuries, as a way to oppress groups of people, to dismiss the suffering of groups of people, and so forth. And my answer there will be the same answer that I have to your question here. Just because something is used unskillfully by some groups of people, when we're talking about the Dharma, that is the truth of how things are, we should not dismiss the truth, but we should actually clarify and explain our truth, and explain the truth rather than to cover up the truth and pretend that the truth is not there. So yes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I mean, it's a phrasing that I think is actually very useful to distinguish the physical sensation, physical sensation of pain. For example, when we are doing a meditation retreat, we can have incredible pain and suffering. And in those moments, actually, if we stick with it, maybe not immediately during the retreat, but after a while of enduring pain, when our equanimity builds up, then we can actually realize that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So we'll still be experiencing pain. We will still be experiencing Vedana, but we won't react upon it. We won't be, we won't suffer because of it. So yes, emotional reactivity is optional, but I think emotional reactivity captures only one element of it. Yes, we won't react to the emotion, but during a retreat, I feel like you can actually really stop suffering. Or actually even during, every day, that translates also into your daily life. When we are taking care, for example, of loved ones, of elderly parents and so forth. Yeah, there can be a lot of actually pain, both physical and mental. And a lot of suffering, both physical and mental. And we can train ourselves and we can see, oh, okay, actually it's just how things are, and drop the suffering. So it is possible. It's not just emotionally reacting to something, which can be through rage, through craving not to experience what we're experiencing, but actually like just letting all go, accepting things as they are. And that's where we see the truth closely. And that's a cessation of suffering. So I would say that Bhanteji is a very wise man. And the reason why he said this quote over and over again was for us to reflect on that. And if there are people that you hear are unskillful in spiritually bypassing, actually, that's how that term is coined for circumstances like the one that you have described, where we see people in pain and in a lot of suffering, and then we bypass, we say something that sounds a little bit like Dhamma or a little bit ultra spiritual, and pretend that and ignore their suffering. Well, we're not practicing Buddhism, we're not practicing compassion in that moment, and we're just saying a little platitude that actually just piles up on our ignorance of our own suffering and the suffering of others. So when we see that occurring in others, we should correct them, and when we see that occurring in ourselves, we should also correct that.
Yeah, I would also just add that although that doesn't appear to be a direct Buddha quote, as far as I can recall, there are many suttas where the Buddha states similar things, where the Buddha makes statements which are effectively equivalent to that quote. So Robert Martin asked, he says, that sounds like a fake Buddha quote. As I said, I don't think it's an exact quote from the Buddha, but there are many suttas where the Buddha says equivalent statements.
So last Friday morning session, I did an hour on Salla Sutta, similarly the arrow, and that's essentially where the Buddha says this.
Yeah, that's one.
So
one place.
So check out that video. And the other thing I'd like to add is the Buddha wants us to always reflect on that we're the owners of our actions, right? If we, and also that we actually are responsible for our own suffering. If we always put our suffering outside on other people, then there's no way we can actually fix that. We just go around killing and trying to change the world and things like that. But when we understand that our suffering basically we are suffering and we can actually let that go, then that's the positive message, right? That we actually can do something about it. So it's always good to reflect and to accept and not to push the responsibility for your suffering on the world or somebody else.
Okay. And Charles Lee says, why practicing wise speech is important. I think this is meant as a question, so I'm going to treat it as a question. And actually, I'm going to quote the abbot of Wat, Florida, Dhamma. I actually can't remember his actual monk name because we always just called him Tan Chao Kun, which is actually his title. In that very long list of Buddhist titles, that's his title. Anyway, he said, if you can't control your mouth, how can you expect to control your mind? Okay, next question. Actually, in all honesty, though, it is important to note how our speech is both a reflection of our own mind and also influences our own mind, and also how our speech can influence the people around us, either in a positive way or a negative way. So controlling our speech is a very important part of our practice. And actually, it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's part of the precepts. It's part of, actually, it forms a huge part of the monastic rules. Actually, most of the monastic rules can be broken through speech. So, for example, the very first rule is not killing people. But actually, if you tell somebody else to kill someone, that also counts as breaking the rule. The second rule is not stealing things, but if you tell somebody else to steal something for you, then once again, you're breaking the rule, and so on. So you can actually break most of the monastic precepts just by speaking. So it's important to be very careful with your speech there as well.
Yeah, the Buddha says that we're born with an axe in our mouth. I really love that simile because it really gives so much the idea of how potent, it's just a little tongue, but whoa, it's a big axe. And we think that it's just a little tongue and that has very little implications, but it has so many implications. Actually, wars can start with just a movement of the tongue. Yeah, so many unskillful acts. So it's very important. And we see, in fact, how so impressive someone like the Buddha is, who always has appropriate speech, always says the right thing at the right time.
Okay.
Yeah, words that are worth treasuring, which is why we have the whole entire Pali Canon.
And Michael asks, what would you suggest for someone who's interested in learning more about Buddhism? I live in the neighborhood. If you live in the neighborhood, you should come to the monastery. That's the best way to learn more about Buddhism. Do you have some other suggestions?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you have the ability to actually go and talk to monastics and Buddhist people, then that's the way to do it, right? And exploring the different types of Buddhism and that kind of stuff. Yeah, come to the monastery.
I mean, if for some reason it's not accessible for someone to come to the monastery, then watching Dhamma talks by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, that's a great place to start. Reading the suttas, that helps. But there really is no substitute for actually going to a monastery. This is what will really give you the deepest and most thorough understanding. And Michael asks, my mindfulness has been kind of scattered over the last couple of days, I think because of work. What meditation method do you think would help improve mindfulness?
Actually, since we're quoting different monastics, senior monastics, what actually comes to mind with your question is what Bhante Sumita calls TikTok meditation, which is basically taking, deliberately short periods of your day, like just doing a 30-second or 1 minute meditation while you're working. Like maybe you can put like a sort of ringer, like a mindfulness bell on your phone, and get yourself. Actually, there's I think the app of Thich Nhat Hanh. I know because actually I was having this mindfulness bell for like so many years on my previous phone when I was a lay person, and I could not understand why my phone would start ringing out of the blue randomly, like that had a bell, and it was because of this app. So you can actually program it, and it will be your mindfulness bell. So whenever you hear this bell, you can take a moment of mindfulness. And so, in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, they call it moment of mindfulness, and Bhante Sumita calls it TikTok meditation, which is like 30 seconds or 1 minute of a short period of meditation where we train ourselves to stop, like drop whatever we're doing and come back to the present experience that we have.
I also recommend constantly paying attention to your feet, constantly practicing mindfulness of feet. Actually, a really powerful practice for increasing your mindfulness of the body is to try to walk silently. This was a practice I learned at the very beginning of my monastic training when I was living in the Zen monastic world. So walking silently it's not only a gift to the people around you, it's also an incredibly powerful way of making sure you're actually paying attention to your own body. When we're not paying attention to our body, then we tend to move much more loudly. So in order to move silently, you have to pay attention. And this will help keep you constantly grounded in present moment awareness of your own body. So mindfulness of feet, try to move silently. So stepping with your toes first and letting the rest of the foot come down slowly. You might move a little bit more slowly, but that's okay. And when you get skill, you can also learn how to move quickly while still moving quietly and mindfully. But in the beginning, you might move a bit more slowly, and that's okay. So mindfulness of feet, and try to walk silently when you move around. These are things which will greatly increase your present moment awareness. And Manny asks, what are the most important suttas for anger, resentment, and attachment? Do you have any recommendations on this?
Yeah, what is it? Anguttara Nikaya 5.22? Is that the removal of anger?
5 ways of removing resentment? I think so.
I think it's 5.22. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the go-to really for that. Well, at least then also Kakachupama Sutta as well. Kakachupama Sutta, that's what, Majjhima Nikaya number 22?
Something like that.
Something
I have to
like
look
that.
at it.
Yeah.
I never remember
don't-
the numbers of
yeah.
suttas.
I either remember the numbers or the names. I rarely ever remember both the numbers and the names of an individual sutta. Yeah, so the simile of the saw, remember if you Google that talks about anger and resentment and actually speech. That's a very important one. The removal of, it's translated different ways. I think Speaker Bodhi translates something like the removal of agitation towards a person or something like that, or maybe that's Thanissaro. But it's 5 ways to remove aversion, right? The first one is metta, practicing metta towards the person. Second one is compassion. Third is avoidance, I think. Fourth is upekkha, equanimity. And then the fifth is to reflect on their karma, that they're the owners of their karma. Right? So these are ways of dealing, when you're agitated towards a person, to reflect on these things. There's also a sutta called, it's in the Udana. It's called Ugly. That's about the anger-eating demon. That's a great one. And then it's in the Samyutta Nikaya, the one where the Buddha is about the slaying of anger.
Yeah.
I forgot what it's called. We just read it like maybe a couple months ago.
Where the
Maybe
guy
it's
asks,
called slaying.
what is the one thing the Buddha approves of killing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Anger with its honeyed crest and poison root.
Yeah.
Meaning that no matter how justified and wonderful feeling your anger is, the root is poison, so nothing good ever comes from it. Yeah. If acting in anger. Yeah.
Good. And Scott says, there was some talk recently about mental illness being a result of karma. I find this a complicated issue, which is related to complex causes and conditions. In the example of torture, mind states will tend to what is called mental illness. Any comments? I don't really understand.
The example of torture, mind states will tend to what is called mental illness.
I don't understand what that line is talking to.
Yeah, I don't understand either, but maybe I can share some reflections. I also don't know which talk you're talking about that recently was about mental illness. Maybe some of the other venerables.
Oh, it just says some talk, so it's probably just
Okay.
somebody they heard.
I thought on our channel. But yeah, well, I might be wrong, but from your question, there seems to me the kind of underlying sense that attributing something to karma is some sort of kind of blaming the person who's experiencing the result of karma. So what I would like to say and specify is that karma is not like it's not, just some kind of sort of divine thing that you have your retribution and it's really bad, but rather it's cause and effect. So there's also karma from this life and karma from past lives that we have done, which simply means intentional action, and intentional actions have results. So it's no different than any physical law. This is a mental law. It's the mental law of karma. So how we're experiencing the world. So when we're talking about, mental illness being a result of karma, well, actually, I've been observing this. It's very real right now. I'm taking care of some family members that actually are experiencing mental illness. And yes, I can totally see, actually, it's been a whole Dhamma lesson in practicality of how certain mental actions that one has done over and over and over again for so many years then can produce a very strong vipaka. That can be a temporary mental illness or a long-term mental illness, or kind of like, an irreversible mental illness in this lifetime. And so for example, in this particular family members, I can trace everything. I know exactly, what has been done in this lifetime that has led to these current results, all the different patterns of minds, because I've been present, I've seen them. But there are also some other things that, for example, are a question mark, that I haven't seen. And so that's, usually with Western psychology, we very much get into the kind of nuts and bolts of what happened in this lifetime. But nobody wonders, like, for example, my nephews, they're, I think 3, 4 years old and 8 years old. They all have very distinct personalities, very distinct patterns of mind. And so where were those coming from? So in Buddhism, we trace that to past lives. And I think actually it's the only reasonable answer that I've seen so far. I mean, that's our experience with everything. That's our experience with my current family members. That's my experience with myself in this lifetime of seeing this cause and effect. So yeah, if it's always something that we do, then it must be. So what we came into this world with this time around must have been a result from a previous action in the past. So yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue to a certain degree. Everything that relates karma is complicated to one degree or the other. The Buddha, in fact, encourages us not to dwell too much, otherwise our head is going to explode if we're trying to really uncover everything. But at the same time, it's very important to understand, to depersonalize karma. It's nothing personal. It's nothing personal, just like as the law of gravity is not personal. It's just a law. It's just how things are, how things work. So if we fully understand that to every intentional action that we put in place, there is a result, then we might behave a little bit more wisely, instead of oh, well, I hope this action is going to have a great result, but this other action, well, who cares? Nobody knows that I'm making this bad action. I'm having all these unwholesome thoughts, cultivating them, and putting lots of fire, maybe doing all these misdeeds, but nobody is looking at me. And then we think that there's going to be no retribution because nobody that we can see around us is seeing it. Well, actually, we'll have a result.
And Robert has a 3-part question. Part 1, during a meditation session yesterday, I experienced an extremely vivid mental movie of being arrested and tossed through the door of a squad car into a hell realm. As the mental imagery faded, my breathing had become shallow and my mindfulness went through the roof, being hyper-aware of the arising and passing away of phenomenon for the next couple minutes. While the result was some of the most fruitful practice I've had in a while, the lead-in was more than a little disturbing. Could you offer some insight into what might have been happening? Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think you just spaced out and started dreaming for a few seconds. It's actually not uncommon during meditation that one actually drifts off or falls asleep and has an extremely vivid dream for a few seconds, or even hallucinates a little bit for a few seconds. I remember one time I was meditating in morning meditation at a Bayagiri when I was very junior. Back then I had a lot of problems with falling asleep during meditation. So I remember sitting there in meditation and I was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, this is great. And then dropped off. And I had this extremely vivid dream that I was still in the meditation hall, but everyone was staring at me. And it felt very real and very uncomfortable. And then I woke up. And of course, nobody was looking at me. They were all meditating. Well, some of them were nodding off just like me because it was like 4 a.m. It's really hard to meditate at 4 a.m. But that experience of everybody staring at me while I was falling asleep in the meditation hall actually gave me this urgency of like, no, I really need to make an effort to stay awake and actually meditate, even though nobody was actually paying any attention to what I was doing. So I just bring this up as an example of how it's possible during meditation, if one's mindfulness is not extremely sharp, it's possible for the mind to very easily slip directly into a dream state, and very quickly. You can go from thinking you're meditating to being completely immersed in a dream state in just a couple of seconds. It can be very quick. So, and then you wake up. Well, you woke up with a sense of urgency, a sense of danger. So those are things which tend to spark the mind into a hypervigilance. So then you had a taste of what it's like when the mind is hypervigilant. And yeah, that makes for some good meditation. So try to have that hypervigilance without nodding off first. So try to be hypervigilant from beginning to end of the meditation. And then not only will you have very fruitful meditation like you did then, but you also won't have the disturbing dream states happening. So those are my thoughts on this experience. Any comments on it? Anything?
No, that's good.
Okay. Let's see, next question. So Dharma Learner says, I am soon ready to retire from work and feel I missed my opportunity for monastic preparation. Where can I apply my efforts in retirement since I feel I cannot become a monastic due to my age? And if you'd like to take this one.
Well, there are these people that when you live in a monastery that you will start to meet. They're called Dharma bums. And Dharma bums are people, they're usually fairly older in my experience. And they're people that kind of just float from monastery to monastery. They're just living in Dhamma experience, going from place to place. And like since you're retired, if you can do that, that's not a bad thing, right? Or if there's one place that you really like, then be a resident there. You know, this is if you're retired and you know the monastery doesn't need to take care of you or anything like that. You're capable and all your finances are fine. Yeah, do it. Be a Dhamma bum or be a resident somewhere. It's common for people to be a resident in places for like 3 years, 4 years even. Right. After the initial making sure that you're okay and, not crazy and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's what I would say. Be a Dharma bum or be a resident. Right.
Yeah. Monasteries are usually delighted to have reliable, sane, faithful, long-term lay residents.
Mm-hmm.
A good long-term lay resident is worth their weight in gold. Mm. So if you want to become one of those, you will find many, many monasteries are delighted to have you. And Dalai Lama T says, can you please provide advice on how to get toddlers started with meditation and books I should read? Ayasoma, you've been teaching your young nephew how to meditate.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say... So we've got it all wrong in the West in the way that we really put way too much emphasis on meditation, especially with children. I mean, it's all well and good, but actually the best way to do it is instead of wrapping ourselves, like getting too intellectual about this, why don't we go and see in communities that have been doing this as a tradition for 2,500 years? How do they actually teach toddlers and children? Well, they bring them to the temple and they teach Dana, Satu, and they like, we had actually our friends from Canada coming with their newborn child.
Beautiful.
Yeah, who is like very, very young. The second one, the first one, we had already seen every single like year as he was growing up. We had missed the 2 years of the pandemic, but they had a newborn during the pandemic, and she's like 2 years old, something like that. She already knows how to do Anjali. It's so beautiful, and rejoicing while giving things to the monks. Similar, our friend Shira, she has this beautiful child, beautiful son that she always brings here to the monastery. And just gives him a lot of different things. And he is like similarly 3-4 years old, something like that, right, Bante? And brings, makes offerings to the Sangha and learns at such a young age how to let go, learns, the happiness of relinquishment instead of accumulation. And so with my nephew, actually, I had been teaching him a little bit before him coming to the monastery, when I was seeing him at my brother's place, some TikTok meditation, but more kind of like as a game. I was like, oh, okay, so since you like to do very difficult things, he's like a very smart kid. So I was kind of having conversations with him of those sorts. And then I was like, oh, do you want to do something really, really difficult? And he's like, okay, yes, I'm going to do something really, really difficult. Like, I don't know if you're going to be able to do it. And he's like, yeah, I'm sure going to be able to do it. Maybe. Okay, what is it? I'm like, all right, now for 1 minute, just 1 minute, I want you to just focus on your breath without thinking. Can you do that? And he kind of did that. Kind of. Semi did that. It was kind of like a challenge at first. And he was like, oh yeah, that was really, really difficult. I wouldn't have not foreseen it. And then we kind of did all these like TikTok meditations as we met. But what really, really got him into Buddhism actually was when he came a couple of weekends ago here at the monastery, where we were entering the Vasa. So there was a ceremony here at the monastery, and we circumambulated the Buddha, and then there was a Dhamma talk, etc. And he loved circumambulating the Buddha. As a matter of fact, when he came the next time, he was like, when are we circumambulating the Buddha? It's really cute. So once again, the tradition has so many beautiful, beautiful pearls, and they just nurture the heart instead of like getting so intellectual about it and so kind of rigid about it. And then, like actually out of the enthusiasm of circumambulating the Buddha, this 8-year-old kid actually woke up at 5 a.m. To meditate with us monastics for an hour. He sat down for 1 hour. I was so impressed. He also walked for an hour and a half, half of the way for our Pindapata. We usually walk 2.5 hours to go to the Montclair's Farmers Market on Saturdays, and he walked for half of the road with us and like the temple boy. But it all kind of really started due to the circumambulation of the Buddha and the chanting. He loved the chanting. So it's actually really beautiful practice of the heart. And when the heart starts opening, then we're like, let me try everything on the menu. It's a really good restaurant here in town.
Okay. And Jojo says, what is the difference between a Dhamma follower or a faith follower and a Sotapanna? So this is a very interesting question, because you're touching on one of the topics which is mentioned in very few places in the suttas. So there's a handful of subjects which come up from time to time where they're a bit of a question mark, because they're spoken about so rarely and there's so little information on them. So a Dhamma follower and a faith follower, these are two different ways that people can enter the path. So a Dhamma follower is somebody whose entrance is through wisdom. So they get some intellectual understanding of the Dhamma, or there's something about the wisdom teachings of the Buddha that really hit home for them. And that's what gives them the enthusiasm and motivation to dig deeply into the practice. And a faith follower is someone who has strong faith in the Buddha. And because of that strong faith, then they commit themselves deeply to the practice. And both the Dhamma follower and the faith follower are described as not yet sotapannas. They're not yet stream enterers, but they are strongly committed enough to the Dhamma that they will inevitably become stream enterers. So it's kind of a preliminary state before one becomes a stream enterer, but when one is established on the path to stream entry. So where the Dhamma follower and faith follower, really probably the easiest category to put them in is what we call Sotapattimagga, the path to stream entry, one who is on the path to stream entry. It's probably the easiest place to put them. There's been some speculation about whether it's possible for someone to be a Dhamma follower or faith follower for many lifetimes before becoming a Sotapanna. And I've heard different opinions on this. Some people are pretty staunch in the opinion that a Dhamma follower or faith follower will become a Sotapanna before the end of this life. But I've also heard people who say that actually it can be hundreds of lifetimes or more. But the person will inevitably eventually become a stream enterer. I don't personally have a strong opinion on the matter. And again, the sutta information on this is pretty sparse. Do you remember anything more? Either of you have any more info on this?
Not really more than you say, but I always like what I got out of this that's interesting is that, you know, somebody who is this is one of those things that a lot of Westerners don't want to believe that there's like actual faith in Buddhism, and there is a place for faith in Buddhism. And you see this faith follower. I've met faith followers, like, you know, like in my opinion, Bhante Silananda is a faith follower. Like he's like, I mean, he's a strong practitioner, but like he just like he'll say things like, when we start walking meditation, we should start with our right foot because that is what our Buddha did. And I was like, what? But like, and he says it so sincerely and so like he's so strong in faith. I've even met, like, I remember once I met a lay Westerner who really felt like a faith follower to me. Like there's just like this strong faith. And I think it has to do with like our karma and our previous tendencies. And like, I'm not a faith follower. I knew, like, as soon as I saw this, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely not a faith follower. I have to put my hand on the fire to learn that it's hot. Like that's just how I am. But there is such a thing. Like some people can, you know, and the fact that you could essentially become a Sotapanna on strong faith is amazing, right? Now, of course, you can't become awakened just on faith. You actually do have to follow the path, you know. But the fact that you can, your faith, you know, if you are a faith inclined person, that it can take you that far is a pretty interesting thing that I think about.
Yeah, actually, I feel like the faith followers have much easier time. At least if they're not born Buddhist, definitely. I mean, yeah, we have actually a faith follower here, Anagarika Jens. I feel like he has a much easier time than a lot of people that I know, in understanding certain forms that are also present. For example, in monasticism, he picks them up very easily because of the strong faith. It took me significantly longer to figure it out. We're bowing, all those forms that we were talking about, I think, in the last couple of days. You know, if you don't come to it immediately with faith, you can waste so much time. I would definitely wasted so much time this lifetime trying to resist, and then going like, oh, this is so great and so supportive for practice. Why was I wasting all that time? We've got sadhana, no problem. It just comes naturally. Yeah. And Anagarika Jens is saying it's a beautiful thing. 5 stars out of 5.
I would give it 10.
Oh, he's 10 stars out of 5, actually, he's saying.
And Dalai Lama's T asks, how do you quiet the mind? Well, I would actually tell you something much more important than quieting the mind, which is learn how to not be bothered by the noisiness of the mind. And once you do that, then your mind will start to become quiet on its own. Anything else?
No, it's good.
Yeah. When you don't attach to the noisiness of the mind, then the noisiness of the mind has no power over you.
Yeah.
And it goes away on its own, just like you said.
And John asks, are there plans to restart in-person retreats at Empty Cloud in the future? Yes, actually, someone and I were just talking about this the other day.
Coming soon. We will announce it soon. We will probably have very small retreats and not as often for the near future. We're figuring out the details, and we'll let you know soon.
So we are still in a pandemic, although it doesn't necessarily feel like it so much these days. But this is something that it's time to start up again. But we're going to be careful with reintroducing retreat practice, but we do intend to reintroduce it soon. And Rick says, I live in a rural area in the USA. Most of the people here are hostile towards Buddhism and meditation. They are the people who twist the Buddhist teachings to inflict harm on others. Well, I'm sorry that you're in a place like that. So, of course, when possible, it's always best to try to find Kalyanamitas, so fellow practitioners who you can be around. But if that isn't an option for you, then you need to do your best to cultivate a deep understanding of the Dhamma. And to be firmly rooted in that deep understanding. And then when other people misapply the Buddhist teachings, then you'll recognize immediately that that's what they're doing. So for example, 100, 200 years ago, many Christian missionaries went to Buddhist countries. And they went around saying things like, Buddhism is so pessimistic because it just talks about suffering. And Christianity is better because it's so much more optimistic. And that actually convinced a lot of people, because a lot of people actually didn't really know Buddhism that well. And they're like, the Buddhists are always talking about suffering. They're right. But it also inspired a lot of people to more deeply examine the Buddha's teachings and to discover that there's actually a whole lot more to Buddhism than just that kind of superficial evaluation of it. And so it actually led to a revival movement in Buddhist countries of a lot of people inspired to look more deeply at the Buddhist teachings and practice them more fully. So when other people say things that are twisting the Buddhist teachings, well, then that's a reminder to you that you need to learn the Buddhist teachings as thoroughly and completely and deeply as possible, so that you will know when they're being used correctly and when they're being used incorrectly. And you will be able to practice in a way that benefits yourself and others. Okay. And Rick says, what do you find especially inspiring in your current practice? Maybe we could each give a short answer to this. Yeah.
Actually, currently what I'm finding really inspiring is the new depths that the First Noble Truth is kind of being experienced in my life. Like the real suffering that the Buddha is talking about, old age, sickness, and death, and how sometimes we can also just, really romanticize old age and sickness and death, actually, all three. Even when we think we actually know how painful they are in our experience, still there is that big, massive delusion that prevents us from really actually grasping it, understanding it, and then wanting to get out of it, essentially. So especially with my parents actually being considerably old now, and me remembering them when I was younger, and I'm not 15, so So I've seen quite a few decades now of just change, shift in the body, shift in the mental faculties, a shift in all of that. So the impermanence of everything that we think is solid and permanent, just, especially when it comes to parents, we tend to think of them, we also tend to have a sort of established relationship with them. And and seeing really the process of old age. I remember really only seeing it with my grandparents when I was, a little child, and actually very much romanticizing it, very much having a very positive association with old age. And I remember actually talking to Bhante Sudaso when I was in the very beginning of my practice, when I had met him, and him having a sort of description of bringing to the table a description of old age that was very different from my experience of old age in relation to my grandparents, and kind of being a little bit doubtful and not quite, very, very trusting of what he was saying about the matter. And now I'm actually experiencing that. And it's really humbling and interesting and painful. But at the same time, the beauty of this practice that gives you the support to actually find the strength and the equanimity to face it, and to understand that there is really a way out. Because without the way out, then actually it can be this realization of suffering can really make you go deranged and really make you so upset. So I'm really grateful. So I guess, especially inspiring in my current practice, the Dhamma, inspiring how it speaks the truth and it gives us a way out of suffering. Just so inspiring. So I guess it's not my practice. I just find inspiring the Dhamma. I don't know if I answered your question.
For me, it's the suttas, which has been my main source of inspiration for the past dozen years or so, basically since the early years of my monastic life. Once I started reading the suttas, my life changed completely. So virtually any sutta, if I start reading it, I'm just like, oh, delightful, magnificent. So it's actually really lovely. Recently, a friend asked me to help her find some sutta references on a particular topic. So I was like searching for references and digging up all these suttas. And I'm just like, oh, it's so beautiful what the Buddha says here. And oh, this is so fascinating. Oh, so delightful. And even though it's stuff which I've read a dozen times over, like every time I'm just like, oh, delicious. So the suttas have been my beloved inspiration for many, many, many years. And I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. Bhante?
Well, yeah, okay. So same thing with me with the suttas, but I wanted to add, I think what's been, I've actually kind of turned a corner of, I had a lot of zeal and inspiration before I went to the monastery to become a monk. And that was kind of like beaten out of me and I lost it. And the last couple of years, I've started to gain it again. I've started to gain my zeal and like the fun of the practice and actually wanting to practice and things like that. But I think also since I've been on my own and then now just recently starting the small processes of like starting my own, organization and things, what's really inspired me a lot is like the generosity of people supporting me. It's like, it's like, I still kind of like, it says like, oh, such and such, sent this. I'm like, my mind goes, why? Why? So it's like, but it's like, it reminds me, I was like, oh, wait, no, this is like, so, people, what I'm doing is of some kind of benefit and people actually are, because when I was at Bhavana, when you're at like a well-established monastery, it's like, you barely even notice it because just everything is just so taken care of for you. You don't really see the generosity of people up close than you do when you're like on your own and being supported and stuff like that. So it's been wonderful to see that. And it's also reflected on something that, years ago when I first became a monastic and reading the suttas and the Buddha's always pointing to the fact that, you should reflect on the generosity that's being shown to you, and you should actually be worthy of that generosity. Right? Like Mahakassapa said, for 7 days I ate the country's alms fruit, a debtor. Right? Until a monastic becomes awakened, they're a debtor. Right? And so like I keep that very close in mind of like, to make sure that I have that kick in the pants, and it's like, okay, I have to be worthy of the generosity that's being shown to me. Right? So that's been an inspiring thing for me.
And Cindy says, I have been doing the mindfulness of feet. It's amazing. It is. It is.
Sadhu.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, particularly the thing about walking silently, it sounds like a minor thing, but actually it really makes a big difference. Because I'll catch myself every now and then. I'm going through the day and I hear myself going like boom, boom, boom. And it's like, whoa, I lost my mindfulness of the body. Reestablish it. Come back to the feeling of the feet. Take the effort to walk a bit more quietly. And it really helps to re-anchor my attention in the body. It's really powerful.
I will agree with that. I actually been taking that practice on as well. And Cindy says, and it's totally free. I also agree with that.
Yeah. And see, Ian gives some sutta recommendations. Anguttara Nikaya 10.80. Thank you. Anguttara Nikaya 1.71 is the one about anger being the only good thing to kill. And Majjhima Nikaya 21 is the simile of the saw. Yep, thanks you. Ian. Yeah. And Ethan says, have there been any monastics you've met who've made a particularly profound impression on you or your practice, either before or after ordaining?
Ajahn after ordaining. Before ordaining, Bhante Sudaso. Actually, when I had met Bhante Sudaso, I remember I was at Bhavana Society and I wrote a message to Bhante J, who was back then an Anagarika, and I remember writing, where can I find the books written by Bhante Sudaso? He hadn't written any books back then, nor have you right now. You should actually do something about him. But yeah, so he's really made an impression, obviously, on my monastic path. About this, I'm very grateful. And Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi, Bhante Sudaso did all the work to make me a Buddhist, and Bhikkhu Bodhi stamped me. And Bhante Gunaratana. Okay, I will stop here because there's too many Bhantes. Venerable Robina Kurti removed most of my ignorance before becoming a monastic. Not most of my ignorance in general, but most of my ignorance that was obstructing me before becoming a monastic, as well as Kanmo Dalma, also incredible bhikkhuni. Anyway, long list of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, which is why I was like, all these bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are great. I want to be great too. So let me don the ochre robe and go forth.
And so I'll keep my list short. So 3 names. So before ordination, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. So for his thoroughness in understanding the suttas. After ordination, Ajahn Pasano, my beloved preceptor, who's always been a source of guidance for me, always been on my side. So it's really, really lovely to have such a good support from a teacher. And Venerable Kenmo Droma. So the bhikkhuni that Ayasoma just mentioned, who helped me come to a much deeper understanding of karma. So some conversations I had with her a few years back about karma really helped me to get a much more clearer understanding of it, and also helped me to purge some wrong view that I'd picked up along the way. It inspired me to go back and look on the suttas about karma more closely, and I realized that I had some wrong view, which was actually not in line with the suttas. So I have a lot of gratitude to her for helping me understand karma better. So yeah, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, Ajahn Pasano, and Kenmo Droma. Those are the big names for me.
Yeah, I don't know, like profound impression. I think maybe when I think of like profound, I think of like, you know, like how some of the Ajahns talk about like when they met Ajahn Chah, like things like profound like there's been many monastics that were important to me, but a profound impression to me, I guess those words speak to something way deeper. And I don't know that I've met a monastic that really gave me a profound impression. And I've met monastics that I learned a lot from, and for whom I would not be here as a monastic today. Ajahn Brahm, Bhante Dhammajiva, later Bhante Ji came later, when I was ready to be ordained. But profound impression. I don't know.
Definitely all the ones I said made a profound impression on me.
So Sumrate says, there's a story that the Buddha told a snake that he didn't say to not hiss when being beaten up to protect oneself. A lot of double negatives in that sentence. Is it not necessary to do so in real life to protect oneself from harm by others?
It's a good question for Bhante J.
I don't know if that's I know Ajahn Brahm has told that story, right? That I said you can hiss, but not bite or something like that. I don't know that that's a sutta story per se, but it has a good message. It's so when it comes to dealing with people who are harmful towards you and unskillful towards you, that becomes a very, very complicated and hard to handle situation in a skillful way. Because the average person, the normal understanding is somebody is harmful towards me, I attack them in defense, or I do, act in an unskillful way. And so then when you have the Buddha coming and telling you certain things, and he's like, well, how do I do that? Right? Like the simile of the saw, people, are saying bad things about monks, and the other monks get angry and agitated. And the Buddha's like, well, no, this is how you should train. My mind shall remain unaffected, and I shall utter no evil words. Right. And then you're like, well, how the heck do you do that? Right. So this is something that comes with wisdom, right? It comes with, we know that the Buddha does not want us to sacrifice ourselves for others. That's from the Dhammapada. We know that the Buddha does not is a good role model in not accepting the gifts from Brahmins who want to berate us and say bad things about us and things like that. Right. So we're not pushovers. Right. We're not supposed to just kind of just let people roll over us. Right. But we have to know how to do it in a skillful way. And some of that is, asking questions from people who might have had the experience. And some of it is you just have to trial and error, right? You have to say, well, how do I handle this in a skillful way? And you don't know, you're not awakened yet. So you try to figure it out, in terms of, if you want to use like Western therapeutic terms, to talk about like setting boundaries, not allowing unskillful people to have too much of your time, too much of your space, too much of your, just too much of your life, right? And kind of being able to be firm, but also firm, but with lots of metta, right? You can have lots of metta for somebody and be extremely firm, and even maybe somewhat like, not aggressive would be the word, but if you have to stick up for yourself, sometimes that doesn't come off as like, well, I have so much metta for you, and but they're just going to be like, well, this person's stupid, I'm just going to take advantage of them more. Right? Sometimes you have to be firm, and sometimes you have to be come off as, I don't know, I'm trying to figure the word, like not brutal, but anyway, that's what I'm going to say. It's like yes. If somebody is you should protect yourself. You should take care of yourself. You should set boundaries, and you should know with wisdom what is, when you go too far, right? Being the snake who doesn't even hiss. Yeah.
And we have several questions left, but not a lot of time. So we'll try to get through the rest of these questions, but we may not quite get through all of them. But we'll make an effort. So Jay Kala says, do you know the phenomenological view of consciousness as intentional, that I must be conscious of something, and as also non-thetic self-consciousness?
Bhante, could I give a suggestion?
Yeah.
So I remember Bhante Panyaratana being really big on this phenomenological stuff. And I would suggest Jay Kala go to Bhante Nyanamoli in Hillside Hermitage. He is more like, he would answer that because he knows like phenomenology, and like he talks about the Dhamma some ways through that kind of philosophical lens.
Yeah, I just don't know these terms. So I would have to have the terms clearly defined before I could give any useful answer. Okay, next one. Charles Lee says, the bios of many older Western lay teachers describe time spent in temporary ordination. Can this still be done? Yes, especially in Thailand and Burma, this is still a very commonly done practice of people becoming temporarily ordained for short periods of time. To be perfectly honest, though, I don't think it's particularly useful for most people. I think realistically, if you want to experience monastic life, you should really commit to it. There's a huge difference between being a monk for 3 days and being a monk for 30 years. So just putting on a robe for a few days is not going to radically change your life for most people. For some people, it makes a difference, but for most people, it's not going to change much. Similarly, being a monk for a day or a week or even a year doesn't necessarily mean you have any understanding of the Dhamma. It just means you're a monk for a year. So I actually don't put much stock in that. If someone's bio says, I was a monk for 3 months in Burma, it's like, 3 months, that's it? Doesn't really mean much of anything. Those are my thoughts on the matter. Okay. Ajahn Yanako mentioned recently that he often feels for the novice monks he sees suffering, and he went through it too. What was the hardest part of being a novice for you?
Is that
Ajahn Yanako?
Ajahn Yanako from Abhayagiri.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Dealing with the other monks, that was the hardest thing for me. Yeah.
Bhante Jay.
As a samaneri, was the hardest thing?
Maybe he was having a great time.
Being thrown into a teaching role. I think that was the hardest thing. Being a samanera and then a month later teaching my first Bhavana retreat. Yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah. For me, the crushing patriarchy of Buddhism.
It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, it hasn't gotten any better, but I got used to it. So, yeah, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or at least used to it. I don't know. That's all.
Okay. Cindy says, how far back, how many generations do you know your lineage teachers? Well, actually, to be honest, it's really only in East Asian Mahayana that much emphasis is placed on knowing your lineage all the way back. In the Theravada world, very few people know back more than 2 or 3 or maybe 4 generations at most. Very rarely. For some reason, the Theravada world just never placed any importance on keeping those records. So for the most part, we just don't have those records. So my teacher was Ajahn Pasano. His teacher was Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Chah had 4 main teachers, and of the 4, the only name I ever remember is Ajahn Mun, who Ajahn Chah said was the most influential. Ajahn Mun's teacher was Ajahn Sao, but I have no idea who's Ajahn Sao's teacher was or if he even had one. So yeah, we just don't really place much importance on these things.
I remember my a lay friend who was a big Korean Buddhist guy, and he showed me on the website the lineage, the Korean lineage that he has, and it literally goes all the way back to the Buddha. Like it says this person, this person, this person, this person, and then you have like I don't know, maybe like you have some like names I actually remember, like recognize, like Dogen or something, like some like big old Mahayana names, and I was like, wow, they really. I mean, is this really going all the way to the back to the Buddha? I mean, it's possible, I guess. You know, like Asian cultures, like China, like, you know, they keep records. Like, you know, if a culture is big on keeping records, then those records can be pretty, you know, tight. I don't know.
Right. And I love all of your comments here. Crescendo says, your comments about using the template of how other Buddhist cultures incorporate training for children is so true, but those comments are also pertinent for adults. We focus on meditation and the intellectual pursuit, and it ends up being an incomplete emphasis. Yes, I completely agree with you. As a matter of fact, I always like to say that I have multiple teachers, and not all of them are monastics. Actually, a lot of my teachers of my ajahns are actually lay people who are born Buddhist. I mean, you can, of course, learn from everyone. But I'm serious when I say that. People who are born in Buddhist cultures have so many incredible things to share, actually, when we're not born in a Buddhist culture, so that we can really understand, not intellectually, but with the heart, we can understand better the Dhamma. So I love being around people who are from Asian cultures. And Robert also says, I found meditation the least helpful aspect of my practice in terms of addressing my depression and anxiety. Dana, along with the other parami and right intention, have been much more helpful. I really wish Pop Buddhism would obsess over meditation less and spend more time on the other teachings and practices. I love Pop Buddhism. And also, I completely agree with you 100% in terms of addressing depression and anxiety. Absolutely, Dana, for me as well, was the magic thing, the magic recipe. I had to do a lot of dana, though, in order to remove it, because I think I had really bad karma to practice. But yeah, like, as in a lot of that, in the sense I created an organization with Bhante Sudasa. We were offering retreats every weekend. But yeah, the Vipaka was instant. Actually, I still remember that after a year of that, I was like, oh, this is like about time that like my really harsh depression comes and hits in. And I was like, oh, it's a little bit late, late. And now it's been several years late. Hasn't come back anymore, which is pretty great. And I was like, oh, wow, look at this practice. Incredible. Okay. Merit. Do not be afraid of merit, says the Buddha. It's right from the suttas.
Great. And we're down to the last two questions. We might get through all the questions tonight. Kristen says, what are some examples of modern businesses that you find to be aligned with ethical practices? This might be a good question for you.
Me? I don't know. Modern businesses that you find to be aligned with ethical practices.
I was thinking from your research into ethical food companies.
I'm thinking, well, I mean, I'm a monastic, so literally, I think as soon as we put robes on, then we become medieval. At least this has been my experience. Like, I just don't know how to use, like, technology, for example. I'm worse than my 80-year-old mom. My 80-year-old mom comes and asks me, how do I use this phone? And I'm like, I have no idea, because it's different from mine, and I really can't like use it. And my dad, I think, was asking me to do another thing with like technology related, and I was just completely clueless. And they asked me questions because I'm significantly younger, like half their age. And yeah. And they actually know more. So I was kind of joking about it, but it was literally also when we were in Seattle, actually, we were joking about it. We were in this like building at a certain point, and we didn't even know how to open the trash can. Like, it was ridiculous because like there were buttons and things. They were like, how do you open the trash can? Or how do you make coffee? Like, it's too complicated. So in terms of modern businesses, I'm thinking the farmer's market, but it's actually really old form of trade.
Well, she didn't say like she said businesses. That mom and pop down the road is a business.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Mom and pop businesses are definitely ethical, but they're not necessarily modern. Or, I mean, they will soon be modern because we've gone so deranged, definitely in the United States, that it's kind of like an innovative concept. But yeah. It's kind of like Buddhist insights, Aptica monastery, that we're so backwards, we're avant-garde. Farmers market, so backwards, it's avant-garde.
And people talk about small organic farms like it's the latest hipster trend, but actually it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. And actually it used to be the #1 occupation in the entire world up until just a few decades ago.
Yeah.
But now it's a luxury item for hipsters in progressive cities.
Yeah.
Even like in America in the 1940s, something like 80% of people were rural agricultural people.
Yeah, but you go still, like, for example, in places in Italy, and it's so backwards, it's avant-garde, because it hasn't, like, literally people just still, like, grow their own food or, like, barter or do this and things like that. In the south of Italy, not the north, but yeah.
Okay, and Pialan and Dira Walpola ask, how does arupa jhana, such as the space of nothingness, help? Does it help to solidify the perception of emptiness? So these are optional practices which are not necessary for awakening. But I think that where they can be helpful is that in order to enter into those states of perception, one has to be willing to let go of the perception of physical things. So all the arupa jhanas, arupa means non-physical, they all are characterized by the fact that one is not experiencing any physical sensation anymore. So for that to be possible, one has to be willing to allow one's body to disappear. So therefore, one must weaken one's attachment to the body sufficiently to let it disappear for a period of time. So I think that can be helpful in training the mind to learn how to let go. But again, it's not strictly necessary for attaining awakening, but for some people, it apparently can be helpful. I've never personally put any effort into developing those particular states of mind in meditation. And I actually don't know any teacher who places much emphasis on it. But they're there. If you want them, they're there. Okay. And one final question. Hai Eng says, how do we manage our last thought moment before we die so as to attain a good rebirth? How can mindfulness help at the dying moment? Well, first off, I would just say that this idea that your last thought determines your next rebirth is not something the Buddha ever said. Mm-hmm. So that's one of these ideas which appeared more than 1,000 years after the Buddha passed away. And it's actually not in line with the Buddha's teachings as we find them in the suttas. According to the teachings in the suttas, your rebirth is determined by a complex interplay of all the karma you've made throughout this entire life, as well as all the karma from all your previous lives, not just your last moment, your last thought at your last moment. That's only a tiny fraction of what determines your next rebirth. As for how mindfulness helps at the dying moment, mindfulness helps at every moment. It helps you keep your mind wholesome, which ultimately is what leads to good rebirths. There's a brief answer. Anything to add to that?
No.
I think that's great. Okay. And well, thank you all for joining us this evening. If you have any requests on topics that you would like for the monastic Sangha to discuss, and as well as particular suttas to explore during sutta study, you're welcome to send an email at info@emptycloud.org, and we'll try our best to put it on the schedule or to organize a Sangha panel of sorts. So any suggestions, ideas, you're welcome to send them in. And if you live in New Jersey or close to New Jersey, New York City area, you're welcome to also join the programs during the weekend in person. And we also have residential opportunities for people to come and spend some time at the monastery for a period of time if you'd like to live like a monastic for a period of time. All right, so may you all be well and happy, and may all good things come to you. We can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we'll see you next time.